So there's about 10 seconds delay.
Yeah.
Looks.
Okay.
All right, cool.
DevOps is how modern enterprises deliver software. If you want to understand how you can do DevOps without friction, this is the live stream you have to watch. See you there. Hey, this is Krish Subramanian from Rishi.Research. Today I am with Tom Granot from Lightrun, and we are going to discuss how you can do DevOps without the friction. If you are someone who has been watching Modern Enterprise Tech Show every Wednesday at 1 p.m., you subscribe to our YouTube channel or Facebook or Twitter, wherever you are watching this, and hit that notification button so that you can get notified every time we go live. Tom, welcome to the show. Can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what your company is doing?
Yes, Krish, pleasure being here. My name is Tom. I'm a developer advocate working for Lightrun. We build a production debugger. In essence, what we do is streamline the process of incident resolution, so it's a bit more familiar and makes more sense as the rest of the DevOps paradigm. And I'll talk a little bit about the company later, but I think we joined here today to talk a little bit about how to reduce friction in the entire DevOps lifecycle. So I'll let you lead, and then we'll take it from there.
Let's set some context. Why should developers care about DevOps? They've been used to delivering software for so long, but suddenly, we are saying, DevOps is the way to go. That's the way you can deliver software fast. But from a developer point of view, where they need to care only about the business logic, why should they care about DevOps?
So when you look at the entire business value of the software we're building, it's important to understand that developer is just one end of the process, right? So the eventual value, the thing that actually brings the company money and makes, keeps us with jobs, is the business value of the software, and not just the actual value the customer derives from it, but as how fast we can innovate and create new features that apply to the new use cases our customers have. Now, historically, when we talked about developing software, there was the pace of changes wasn't as rapid as it was today. It was okay to have longer cycles, even years-long cycles before we push new features into production. As better infrastructure and better devices become available to our customers and their needs change every single day, we need to develop software that fits that kind of fast pace of living. DevOps is one set of methodologies and practices that ensure that we can get there as fast as possible. So it's not only about creating great software nowadays, it's also about creating it fast and getting it to the hands of our users as fast as possible. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
All right. In my personal perspective, as a modern day developer, there's really no excuse to not understanding the full flow. So if you're part of a larger engineering organization, as most of us are, you have to understand where you fit in the puzzle and how you can make sure that the end product your customer uses is as best as possible. And in your perspective, it's obviously writing great code that makes logical sense and works as it is expected to. But it's also about ensuring that you understand how to build your code and how to structure your codes in those new environments. And here, DevOps comes into play, and understanding the processes involved involved in the methodology of DevOps is required.
Awesome. If you are watching this in a live stream, or if you are watching it in a replay, if you are using the DevOps, if you have embraced DevOps as a part of your developer workflow, add your comment there talking about what you think, how DevOps is helping you. And if you are someone who is watching the live stream, you can also ask questions to Tom. He will be more than happy to answer. And Tom, you talked about why developers should embrace DevOps. Can you talk about what are some of the friction points that comes in the way as developers embrace DevOps?
So I think the first and foremost kind of point of friction is the fact that you don't run your software where you expect it to. And I'll explain. You develop your software on your own local machine, and then it is deployed by these DevOps personnel somewhere along the road to the production services. This is the gap between production and development that needs to be as shortened as possible. So the person developing the software must understand exactly how the production system will eventually run it in order to write it in the best way that they can. And it kind of stems from that people designing the architecture of the product, basically the architects of the product are the only one who should care about it, right? Because they're the ones who are eventually in charge, the product owners, that eventual piece of code that the developer wrote makes it in production safely. But I think that it's as a kind of part of the discipline of software engineering, we need to start understanding that if we're writing code that is a part of a bigger application, and when you write your code in a way that doesn't fit the entire process of your organization, you're causing blocks, you're causing basically stoppages in the process, much like in a factory, where every kind of piece of work, every machine in the factory needs to operate in a kind of collaborative fashion with the rest of the machines. If one machine misbehaves, then all the rest of them suffer as well. So that starts at the very, very kind of low level, from writing your code in a way that fits the entire paradigm of your team. So that's writing your test properly, writing your documentation properly, making sure that you follow the current PR process or whatever whatever continuous integration process you have in your company. That's like the table stakes for being a part of the team and being a good player. But the kind of the further understanding that you must have is figuring out where your code goes afterwards. So making sure that you write it originally in a way that makes sense with your build server and makes sense with the way it's going to be deployed eventually. If it's a microservices architecture, understand that you're part of a service that needs to talk to other services, understand where they are in the network, and those kind of concerns that you need to keep in mind while you're building your software. So always understand that you're part of a bigger flow. You're part of a bigger organization that is in charge of creating valuable software. Understand your role in it, and make sure that you're not a blockage in the process, but actually an accessory. You help the process move forward instead of stopping it midway.
Yeah. I think the factory analogy you talked about is a good one to think about. As the bid moves from developer to production across the DevOps pipeline, think of it as assembly line in the factory with various stakeholders having their role to play. How do you think we can reduce friction? Like, let's start with the developer laptop and go all the way to production. Talk about some of the ways we can reduce friction, and probably you could even talk about some of the best practices we can have as a part of the organization to reduce friction.
Right. So just to kind of clarify, the factory analogy in DevOps come from this book, The Finnish Product by Jim Kim, who's like I'd say the Bible of DevOps nowadays. It's one of the foremost books written about DevOps, or at least one of the most familiar ones. And in the book, they illustrate this kind of imaginary scenario of a factory. It's an IT department inside a company that produces spare parts. And all of the analogies that apply to the factory part of the operation also apply to the software organization part of the operation, which is why a lot of the times you will hear stuff like pipelines and factory and assembly lines in the context of DevOps, I think. Regarding your original question, which is how we can reduce friction. So whenever you act with any part of your program, for example, the reliable third-party dependency, you need to understand the risk associated with it. So let's say you are bringing in a third-party dependency from GitHub, from an open source repository, for example. So you need to keep in mind all the processes that are involved when adding that pieces of software. So first and foremost is security, right? You need to make sure that the component is scanned for security purposes. And then you need to make sure that wherever the software is being deployed to, there is a repo like JFrog's Bintray, for example, or any other type of repositories that you can think of in your kind of own world that are available for pulling those third-party dependencies during build time. And then you need to also ensure that if somebody else already used a third-party dependency, don't try and pull in another of your own. You need to kind of streamline the process as much as possible from your own kind of perspective as a developer. And then like following up along the road, whenever you add another piece of complexity, whenever you want to say, all right, I need another service that does X, or I need another kind of piece of code that does Y, you need to figure out how it will look like down the road. So eventually it will get built, eventually it will get deployed, eventually it will consume more resources. So while you are building your software, while you are architecting the solution for your current problem, you need to ensure that you kind of envision your way through the pipeline. So keep in mind and even write down all of the different things that need to be done before they can be deployed into production. Now, in modern teams, many organizations have this process automated. So the build server knows that when new stuff is coming in, it needs to do X, Y, Z. And there are written processes that detail exactly what happens when a new service needs to be propped up. And when applications are becoming increasingly more and more complex, there are kind of barriers in the way, automated barriers in the way before you can push them into production to ensure that all of those various checkboxes that need to be checked during the process are actually checked. And I think that as a developer, your main responsibility is to be aware of those facts. That's the first kind and foremost things. And when eventually an issue in production arises based on the things that you built, it is your responsibility as a developer to either, if you're on call, you probably fix it yourself. But as a developer, it's your responsibility to understand the post-mortem, look at exactly what happened, and when you architect your next solution, make sure that you don't create more friction instead of fixing the friction you create. So keep in mind that you are part of an organization, you are part of to build something greater than yourself, and make sure that you add value instead of diminishing it.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree with you that developers should understand the entire process and sort of like keep that in mind while they build their code. But at the same time, this involves people. Like we have to talk a little bit about people mindset. One is developers understanding how the code behaves in production and probably taking action to sort of make it seamless. But on the other hand, you have to see from the operations point of view. Operations should also ensure that developers have the necessary information and sort of like give them the tools, give them the data that is needed for them to understand what are the things operations can do that makes developers' life easier.
So you can kind of divide it into two portions, right? You can divide it into production monitoring and observability, basically looking at exactly what happens in the running production software and be able to kind of get a full picture as fast as possible. And the other part, and I intentionally divided two, is developer tooling. So when I'm talking about a proper CI/CD pipeline and infrastructure, there are today dedicated personnel inside many organizations that deal with building that infrastructure in a way that makes sense for the developers. So if you're an operations person or a DevOps person inside an engineering organization, it's exactly like it's the developer's responsibility to kind of envision the way their code runs in production. As an operations person, it's your responsibility not to only envision what it's like for your developers to build software, but actually speak to them and understand how you can streamline their processes. And there are numerous ways you can do it, and there are many commonalities. So when you're looking at various organizations, there are things that kind of happen over and over again. So a build server that works properly and has multiple concurrent builds that allow developers to not wait for the results of their tests and checks and builds to come back. That's like table stakes for building good pipelines. But furthermore, when you're looking at the way your developers build build their code, a lot of the time there is working with infrastructure involved. A lot of the time there are many scripts that they need to run, or things they need to do to get into staging environments, or maybe things that they can do locally in order to prop up mocks and fake data and all of those type of stuff. And as an operations person, when you provide this type of developer tooling to your developers, you're doing exactly what a developer did when he envisioned his code running in production. You are aiding the total process. You are aiding the machines in working better doing inside the factory. So that's the developer tooling side of things. But there's also, in my perspective, a very, very important part, which is the production observability part of things, where you need to understand how to enable developers to get quick, concise, and accurate data in the best way possible. So that the table stakes here is instrumentation of correct application monitoring and all of those type of logging tooling involved in aggregating, analyzing, and understanding what's going on in production. But I think even more than that, again, coming back to the analogy of the developer envisioning their code running in production, is the operations person concerned to envision what might go wrong and then have the tooling in place to ensure that that everything is visible, understandable when an incident happens. And later on, when we'll talk about Lightrun, I think that's kind of where we kind of snugly fit in at the end of the pipeline with the concept of continuous observability. But again, we'll refer to it at the end of the segment. Just to kind of cap, what I'm saying is there is developer tooling side of things, the production observability side of things, and as operations personnel, it's our responsibility to do both. Basically ensure that production is as observable and understandable as possible, and that the tooling our developer use is top-notch, state-of-the-art, and they can basically get away with, they can basically continue coding without dealing with configuration all day long.
Yeah, the other aspect when we go beyond operations is security. DevSecOps is gaining a lot of traction, and every large organization is worried about security these days, especially with the kind of news we are getting from regarding cybercrime and all those things. How can security be brought into this process? Like you talked about how the operations can enable developers to sort of seamlessly push the code to the right. But the security, how can we also ensure that the security needs are enabled so that when developers architect their applications, all the best practices are encapsulated and it's taken all the way to production?
Right. So I want to mention a certain phrase. I think his name was, I actually wrote the name just so I can remember it during the show. Mark Troster from Progress said in your previous webcast, he mentioned something about COVID being a perfect storm for this kind of enablement of new processes. And I really like that, and that statement, because he basically said that now is the greatest time to employ these type of practices because everybody has a lot of problems regarding working from home, and a lot of people are moving into digitization. Now there's this whole kind of understanding that proper digital processes are important, and this doesn't only apply to shops that need to go from like brick and mortar to online stores. It also applies to software organizations in the sense that now, when everybody's working from their own home, and all of the security personnel are overloaded with a lot of different type of different new problems that arise from this situation, it's a great time, like a perfect storm, to promote this type of kind of innovations inside the organization. To answer your question, when you're talking about security analysis of your software, you can look at various stages of the pipeline to understand exactly what you can do. So there is many different solutions nowadays to enable this DevSecOps methodology, Snyk being one of them, J4 X-Ray being another, White Source being a third, where you can use these automated tools and automated process, and more importantly, the methodologies they encapsulate with them in order to enable security throughout your automated process. So if you're an operations person, and you are not a security person, but you are building the infrastructure your developer are using, think about the developer tooling your developers are using. Is there any security component to it? Is there vulnerability checks of your third-party dependencies? If you're looking at the pipeline, is there security scanning of the binaries? Is there an understanding of what's going on? Is there configuration auditing to make sure that no rules, security groups, nothing along the way got changed automatically that could expose new attack surfaces for your software. And again, I keep on saying this envisioning kind of discipline that you must have both as an operations person and as a developer. You must envision what can go wrong and be prepared for it. You must be available for the situation to unfold. You must be there mentally and kind of try to understand all the consequences that might happen and put tooling in place to prevent it. And DevSecOps is basically all about this automation of the process and understanding that streamlining security is what makes production software secure. New vulnerabilities and new exploits will come out all the time. Many security companies, their sole business is research and understanding those vulnerabilities, and lots of information is becoming available with vuln databases and the like. And if you can get that information into your automated DevOps processes, and more importantly, into the mind and the mindset of your developers and operations people, then you've won half the fight. And again, use the tooling out there, use the knowledge out there, go out, learn, and kind of use that time, that complicated time that we're in right now, in order to empower your organization with those toolings and methodologies.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said in terms of ensuring that the security is sort of baked into the process. At Research, we usually talk to decision makers and help them understand how these emerging trends as well as emerging technologies fits into their organizational needs. So we spoke about developers, we spoke about operations people, we spoke about how we can ensure security. Can you address how decision makers can empower these various stakeholders to ensure that the DevOps happens in a friction-free environment?
Of course. So again, at the end of the day, the person making the plan and basically deciding the path of the organization is the person in charge, the team lead, the director of engineering, the VP engineering, the VP operations, depending on the title inside the company. Now, when you look at your people and you look at the work that they do, a lot of the time there are implicit bottlenecks. And I keep on going back to the Phoenix project because they have these kind of ways. They speak about ways in which, the 4 ways in which you can kind of streamline the process inside your factory. And as a decision maker, it is your sole responsibility to ensure that your people are not blocked. And if you see a block, you're looking at the pipeline, you're looking at the process, and something is blocked, be it a certain person who's hogging the process for personal reasons, that it's not a great fit culturally. Maybe the tooling is outdated, and maybe your developers are stuck playing with configurations all day instead of actually doing work. You need to understand exactly what is the point of friction, and then pull all of the energy and resources you have into that specific point of friction to unclog it. And allowing your developers to use those tools and allowing them kind of the freedom to explore and letting them tell you that sometimes there's a new tool available because you might not always be on top of every single new innovation in the field. And listening to them and understanding their needs might enable the organization not to only act faster, but sometimes more importantly, save money on costly incidents. One great example is this kind of adoption of CI/CD process in general. Decision makers in many larger companies are kind of hesitant of employing them inside their kind of long-form, multi-month development cycles, because it requires kind of a lot of giving of control to these automated processes. But in comparison, there are many other large organizations, usually their competitors, who have employed those tactics successfully and then streamlined operations to a state where they can deploy daily and even sometimes multiple features daily and in course multiple different products. And I urge you, if you are a decision maker, I urge you to kind of step back, look at the picture from the bird's eye view, look at exactly what's going on, try and again envision what your developers are like, talk to them also, and your operations people are struggling with, and try to unclog as much as possible, and specifically use the current atmosphere to move processes along. This is a time, an unfortunate time in history, but one that nonetheless enables a lot of innovation, and we should take care to utilize it.
As I speak to you, brought up this point about decision makers being hesitant to give up control. But when I talk to some of the enterprise developers, they are worried that if their organization embrace DevOps in full speed, probably they may have to change the way in which they develop applications. Probably they expect that there is too much to change from they are worried about going out of the comfort zone and that impeding what they are doing. So can you address some of their concerns and tell whether embracing these DevOps technologies and processes in place requires these developers to sort of change the way they are doing their work?
So it all comes down to culture, right? So if the culture is tied to a certain process or to a certain way of thinking, that it's very difficult to change the process without changing the culture around it, because somebody around the company, usually the decision maker, will indeed block it. So when we're talking about kind of larger, more traditional organizations in which the processes move a bit slower and they're hard to change, what I always like to talk about is numbers, right? So if I can show you that a certain piece of software will shave off a few hours of your developer times every day, that's a no-brainer, right? If you pay your developers X and the tooling costs Y and Y is less than X, then a lot of the times the implementation of the tool might save you a lot of money during the long run. But that's kind of the simplistic approach to it. It's not always that simple. Just gathering the information and understanding what's going on is sometimes half the problem. So what I suggest to organization leaders who are obviously crunch, their time is kind of very short, and they can't always gather the information and kind of justify the cause of the process they want to implement. What I, again, strongly suggest you is to talk to people and figure out exactly what they say might be broken, and then base your justifications of those new processes on that. And if your developers are scared of, or not kind of hesitant of moving on to the new process, what you could do is show them the value it will provide them personally during the road. Convince them that employing the CI/CD pipeline, for example, or adding this APM solution will decrease MTTR and increase this incident resolution thing, instead of going in manually and understanding what's going on. It's all about numbers, and we are all analytical people, and I think we can utilize that to our favor in this case. Show the value with numbers.
Yeah. Lightrun has been doing some interesting work in this space, and you have some interesting technologies that could really help developers understand what happens in the production and probably ensure that their code works seamlessly in production. Can you talk about what Lightrun offers and how developers can benefit from Lightrun?
Of course. So as I mentioned in the beginning, Lightrun is a production debugger, and we are slowly building it into the prime runtime observability engine, in the market. The gist is our software allows developers to dynamically adapt the observability pillars generated by their application based on user context and application state. I think that the best way to explain it is by actually showing what we save. So instead of having to hotfix your software with more logs, more metrics, and more traces as you debug an incident in production, instead what you can do is you can deploy Lightrun to your software and then add logs, metrics, and traces at runtime. Basically, instead of having to stop the process, redeploy, add more observability in it, you can ask new questions and get new answers immediately. So observability is, again, all about this notion of understanding the system by what it exposes about itself. But sometimes when the developers add the logs and metrics and traces on the left side of the SDLC, right, during development, pieces are missing when you're looking at them from the right side in production. So what we're trying to do is to shift left observability. We're trying to make sure that the developers can add in real time more information, more visibility, more understanding into the software, without having to constantly redeploy, without having to constantly hotfix and constantly kind of push more code into production when all you want is to get more visibility into it. And I think this kind of fits well inside the entire methodology of DevOps and empowering developers, because what we're doing is streamlining this kind of very cumbersome, very complicated, and most importantly, very distributed knowledge-wise process of incident resolution. So from a point in time where you had to kind of have very kind of niche people who understand this specific piece of software, who can tell you exactly what's going on, only if they deploy this piece of code in order to understand what's going on. There's like this lots of barriers and blockades along the way when all you want to do is get your software back in the hands of your customers. What we enable developers to do is to get more information immediately from the software. Even sometimes without having the exact context of what's going on, looking at the stack traces, looking at the metrics, looking at the variables enables you to systematically, dynamically, and again, in a more personal way to understand exactly what's going on. And I think that the general notion of streamlining operations we fit well in this general notion of streamlining operations. Much like a CI/CD pipeline streamlines the code, streamlines the application release, the application from development to production, we streamline the process of incident resolution, getting the software from not working to working as fast as possible, slashing MTTR along the way.
Yeah, in the early days of DevOps, we used to joke that I test my code in production, and I think with a tool like Lightrun, probably that could be reality today without even worrying about how it is going to blow up. So this is an interesting tool. I will dig more into it, and thanks for talking about the tool. Where can they find you on? What are your coordinates? Where can they find you? And if they want to check out Lightrun, what are the coordinates? Can you talk about it?
So lightrun.com reads like it sounds like it reads. And that's if you want to go to our website, and you can check basically all of our product and security considerations and basically everything that has to do with installing Lightrun in production. If you want to reach out to me personally, my DMs are open. Tom Granot, at Tom Granot on Twitter, also on GitHub, basically everywhere on the internet. And again, if you want to talk observability, if you want to talk DevOps, if you want to talk how to get your organization up to speed regarding all those concerns, then I'm here. Just talk to me, and we can figure something out.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. It was a great conversation. And if you are an organization wanting to up your game and make sure that you're ready for the kind of new world we are going in after this pandemic, I think you need to have a perfect understanding of what DevOps is and what kind of tools that will help. And I think today Tom laid out the landscape pretty well, and it was a great conversation. And a tool like Lightrun will help you understand what is needed for production, probably deliver your software much faster in a more confident way. It's not just about delivering software quickly, it's about delivering better software quickly. That means you need to better understand what's happening in the production, and a tool like Lightrun could help there. It was a great conversation with Tom today, and I'm looking forward to talking to you in the next Modern Enterprise Tech Show next Wednesday, and it's going to be again on DevOps. It's about CI/CD with Kubernetes. Thank you very much. See you next week.